Now, in addition to the state and the county level zones, there's notices and advisories. These are not a hazard zone. We don't particularly get data for it, but this is more like an FYI. In addition to the hazard zones, there's some additional advisors and notices you want to think about, and Robert can continue talking about the rest of. I think you're on mute, Robert.
Ah, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So in addition to all the zones that we talked about, some of these advisories and notices are there as an FYI. They're there to make sure the buyer has done their due diligence and knows everything about the property. Megan's Law lets you know if there's any registered sex offenders nearby. The Endangered Species Act lets you know about 300 different endangered species that might be, living in where your home is. And so it'll let you know if you have an endangered species, they're protected by the Endangered Species Act. There's some energy related to solar, oil and gas wells, mold, and so forth that could be affected by the property.
There's description about each one of this on the report. It talks about it in more detail. So if the buyer has more questions about it and wants to investigate any of this a little bit further, the report will indicate and guide them where to go and how to obtain more information.
So we also offer an environmental report. This is not required to be provided by the seller. It's an optional report, but highly recommended because it adds more protection for the seller for a very low cost. Here's a summary: oil and gas wells, leaking underground storage tanks. There's two other public databases, NPL and EnviroStore, that keeps a database of uncontrolled abandoned waste sites and contaminated sites. I highly recommend to order this report. That anything that's man-made, that's related, that us humans have created, will be added to this report and will be on this report, and it's included in this portion.
I'll have a note on that as well. Back in 1920s to 1950s, if there was any gas station in the corner and there was an underground storage tank there, sometimes they would not remove that tank in a proper way where it wouldn't affect the soil. Instead, they might have built a home on top of that, or some sort of new construction with a nearby. So there is an agency, LUST, L-U-S-T, that kept track of this leaking underground storage tanks is what they call it. So there's a database around it, and so when you pull a report and you provide your address, our reports search for nearby information that could affect the buyer. Again, it will list that, hey, saying there could be an LUST related address nearby. Again, you can't do much about it. It comes with the territory, but buyer has the right to know. It's just more of like an FYI to know that, within a mile of their home, there is a LUST related.
And so, Vince, in regards to this report, like you're saying, it's an optional report. So what happens where the seller provides a report and they're only providing the standard report and not this option? Are agents like myself able to pay for it additionally? Would we be able to negotiate that? What's the process there like?
If typically what I try to tell the agents is, you're in a transaction, typically, let's say an average home is $500,000. The difference between the cost of regular, what's required, compared to with environmental report, typically is about $20. So to me, the way I'm looking at it is, why risk the transaction just for $20? From sellers and buyers' perspective, the $20 is the lowest fee in that transaction, and to me, it's why risk it. And from buyers' perspective, it's definitely more information for them to know, and from sellers' perspective, it's more protection for them to let the buyer know we have shared everything we know. In addition to the natural hazards that affect the environment, there's some man-made hazards that could have affected the property, and here's the report on it.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
I would say just for ease of mind, I would rather have my clients have more information than less information.
Most definitely.
Absolutely.
Most definitely.